Hey dads, welcome to episode 37 of the Beatitudes podcast. I'm Dr. Greg Popcak, and I want to continue our walk through the practices of the liturgy of domestic church life. We've gotten through the first two rites of the liturgy of domestic church life. The first rite being the rite of Christian relationship, where we practice the four habits that help us to learn how to live Christ's love in our homes, practice that sacrificial love that enables us to live out our priestly vocation of baptism, by really consecrating everything we do at home, by filling it with a little bit of God's love. So home life becomes a little way of holiness. And then we talked about the four practices that make up the rite of family rituals, where we work and play and talk and pray together a little bit every day as a family so that we can prophetically witness to how Christians live. And by doing that, we live out our prophetic mission of baptism by calling each other on to lead godly lives by modeling Christian attitudes toward working, playing, and talking and praying together. We left off last time with creating prayer rituals. So now we're going to move on to the third rite of the liturgy of domestic church life, the rite of reaching out. And this has to do with living out the royal mission of baptism, where we reign with Christ by serving with Christ. You know, an important part of our Christian vocation is service. And it's not just something we do, it's really something we are. We are meant to be servants as Christ was a servant. And so we have to start by realizing that service isn't a project we just do for other people at special reserved times. It's really part of our Christian identity, you know, being a servant. For men, being a servant leader, in particular, but encouraging service in our homes. It has to start in the home environment first. And we have this tendency, I think, to think that the service we do at home doesn't really count. That if we want to be holy men and build the kingdom, it only counts if we're doing it at church or in the community. And I want to challenge you all on that idea because, the most important ministry is the ministry we do in our domestic church, because no one else will do that ministry. You know, the church teaches us that our family, every marriage and family, is a brick in the kingdom of God. And too often I see husbands and fathers neglecting to form the brick that they're responsible for, because they're so busy trying, you know, out of the goodness of their heart, out of a really genuinely good place, trying to build the kingdom by leaving home all the time and going out into the world to do things out there for those people. Meanwhile, we neglect our own marriage and family lives. And so this rite of reaching out begins at home, because that's the place we have the greatest opportunity to serve and build the kingdom. By taking up that mantle of ministry to the domestic church, to our domestic church, to make sure that it's a strong brick and not a crumbling brick in the wall of the kingdom of God, but a strong brick that serves as a great foundation for that kingdom. And we do that by making sure that we're modeling that service to our wife and to our kids, that we're resisting the number one temptation, which is that we all love our comfort zones more than we love each other. And I've talked about this before, but it's true. I'm judging myself in this too. You know, I love my comfort zone more than I love my wife, more than I love my kids. I have to constantly work against that. You know, there'll be lots of times where my wife asks me to do something that I just don't feel like doing, or that just isn't really my thing. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing immoral about it. There's nothing objectively disordered about the request. I just don't feel like doing it. Or it's outside what I prefer to do or how I prefer to be. And I'm tempted to either say no or be passive aggressive about it and drag my feet, you know, and just say, yeah, I'll get to it, and then not do it. And we've all done that, right? But when we do that, we undermine that royal mission of our baptism. We undermine that call to serve with Christ, to reign with Christ by serving with him. And so I think as a general rule, we want to practice the rite of reaching out by remembering to be servant leaders at home. Now, there are 4 practices that make up this rite of reaching out, and I'm going to spend the next kind of 4 sessions talking about each one of those. The first one is generous service in the home, and that has to do with how we serve our wife and kids and how we encourage our family to serve each other. The second practice is doing ministry while being a family at home and being mindful of others while being a family at home. And that involves the things that we can do to make a difference even from home, right? The third practice is being a godly family in the world, which has to do with things like when we go out to dinner or we go out to run errands, how do we treat the people that we encounter? And then the fourth practice is families serving together, domestic churches actually doing service in the parish or community together so that we can not just bless other people with the service that we do, but with the witness of love that we share. And each one of those, is a way of exercising that ministry of service, of demonstrating that desire to reign with Christ by serving with him. But it starts at home and then moves progressively outward from there. There's a difference between an ethic of service and an ethos of service. I apologize for throwing those words at you, but it's an important distinction. So an ethic is when I do the right thing, not necessarily for the right reasons, right? So the example I always like to give to distinguish between an ethic and an ethos is, I could not cheat on my wife because who needs the hassle, right? And that's a moral ethic, right? I'm doing the right thing, but is that really the best reason to do it? Well, no, but I'm still doing the right thing. Okay. A moral ethos would be, I don't cheat on my wife because I love my wife. Same thing with service. An ethic of service is, I need to find times to go serve those people over there because that's my Christian duty. And then still, superficially, I'm doing good things. I'm building the kingdom. I'm serving people. What objection could you possibly have to that? But an ethos of service is when I don't just see service as an activity I do for those people over there, but rather service, being a servant, is something that I'm called to witness to in my daily life, especially with my wife and my kids. And so, yes, of course I serve other people too. Of course I look for opportunities to use my gifts and talents to bless others outside of my home. But mainly, I challenge in the moment my tendency to love my comfort zone more than I love my wife and kids. And so before I say no to something that my wife or kids ask me to do, I don't ask, I don't just stop with the fact that I don't feel like doing it or this is outside my comfort zone. I ask, is this thing morally offensive in some way that I'm being asked to do? Is it somehow demeaning? Is it objectively problematic for some reason? If the answer is no to any of those things, then the next thing is, well, I should figure out how I could say yes to it. Now, I might not be able to say yes to it right this second, and that's okay. I've talked in other Beatitude podcasts about the idea of negotiating the how and the when, but not the what. So in other words, my wife asks me to do something, that's the what. But maybe I can't do it right now or in the way she's asked, but I can propose another how and when by which I can meet her what, right? So I'm still able to be generous by saying, well, I can't do that right now, but I could do it this way or in this time or in these ways. And then I'm proposing alternatives there where I'm saying yes to her request, but I'm proposing ways that would actually work for me as well. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a very reasonable thing to do. But what I want to avoid doing is just saying no because I can't do exactly what she asked me, exactly how she asked me to do it, mainly because I don't feel like doing it. Same thing with the kids. If the kids ask me for something, instead of just saying no to it because I don't feel like it, I should ask myself, is what they're asking somehow objectively bad? Objectively immoral, demeaning in some way, objectively problematic. If not, then I should try to figure out a way to help them get it. That doesn't mean I have to give everything to them that they ask me for, but I should at least be willing to walk them through a way they could get that thing in a way that's godly and virtuous, and then support them in following through with that. And by doing that, we all grow in Christian virtue. We all grow in that ability to be generous to each other. When you might say, well, how are we being generous to each other if I'm saying yes to everything? Well, again, you're not saying yes to the how and the when all the time. You're saying yes to the what, as long as it's not demeaning or objectively immoral in some way, or objectively unhealthy or problematic. Well, you're being generous, but you're being mutually generous to each other, because when I try to negotiate the how and the when, I'm asking you to be generous to me. To recognize that, okay, well, I can't do it exactly how and when you're saying, but I'm still saying yes to you. Let's negotiate. Let's work together to figure out a plan. And in that plan, in that negotiation, is that mutual generosity. But it's still rooted in the idea that I'm saying yes to you. So, we're going to talk over the next 4 sessions about each of the practices in the Rite of Reaching Out. As I said, number 1, generous service in the home. Number 2, being mindful of others while being at home. Number 3, being a godly family in the world. And number 4, doing the service together as a family. But in this first one, I just wanted to introduce the idea of being a servant leader in the home. Being a servant leader, and I've talked about this throughout the whole series of the Beatitudes, doesn't mean setting the agenda for the family and then serving the family to make your agenda work. It means listening first, and praying and hearing what your wife and children are asking of you, and then really praying together with your wife and children about godly ways to meet those intentions. So you're being a servant to their needs. Just as Christ was, God had a plan for our salvation. He emptied himself and became man, but he did that because he was listening to what we needed to be saved. He submitted ultimately to what our needs were. He didn't just say, I'm going to do this to save you whether it works or not. He said, these are people who are broken and who need to be shown. Well, they need me to open up the gates of heaven, and they need me to show them how to walk through it. So rather than just telling them what to do, I'm going to become man, and I'm going to serve them, and I'm going to heal them, and I'm going to feed them, and I'm going to teach them, and I'm going to walk with them, and I'm going to mourn with them. And as I do that, I'm showing them how to walk through the gate that I will open through my passion, death, and resurrection. God humbled himself to become one of us so that he could then lead us through his service to be servants like him. And we become servant leaders by humbling ourselves to listen to our wife and to our kids, to value their needs over our comfort zone, and to show them how to be servants to each other in the family by serving first and being that first servant in the home. So if you've got questions about this, I'm sure that we'll start to answer many of them as we go through the next 4 practices in the Rite of Reaching Out. But in the meantime, if you want to ask questions to follow up on this on the Catholic Home app, you can post them to the Questions and Coaching channel, the Home Builders channel there, and I'd love to continue the conversation there. But thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the liturgy of domestic church life and looking at this third rite of the liturgy of domestic church life, which is the Rite of Reaching Out, where we learn how to be genuine, authentic, integrated servants of God in our homes and in the world.